Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to me reading the Heritage Foundation's top 7 priorities so you don't have to. Today, we're talking about countering the threat of communist China. Now, interestingly enough, this fifth objective is actually the longest out of any of them, which means they either really, really strongly believe that China is a threat to them, or they just really want us to believe it. Since this fifth objective is the longest out of all of their objectives, I'm going to jump right in. The introduction starts, the Chinese Communist Party is the most persistent and consequential threat facing the American people today. Vladimir Putin deserves the world's condemnation for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but China's ongoing military expansion and theft of American jobs and technology are direct threats to our security and prosperity. The Heritage Enterprise will expose China's aggressive military buildup, growing cyber capabilities, gross violations of human rights, and raising use of economic coercion. We will push for concrete actions like resurrecting the Department of Justice China Initiative and barring members of the Chinese Communist Party from national security research funded by federal contracts and grants. To preserve our freedom, the Heritage Enterprise will advance policy to confront China's attack on American interests and values, develop a robust U.S. economy that's resistant to nefarious Chinese influence, and ensure that we have the necessary capabilities to defend the United States and its interests and allies abroad in an era of great power competition. We must confront the CCP by developing a robust and comprehensive legislative agenda and introducing it into the House of Representatives in 2023. A comprehensive education campaign for members of Congress, stakeholders, and the American people is required to ensure the threat of the CCP can be matched by the American strength. The CCP's pernicious influence is often hidden in plain sight, and Heritage's efforts in the next few years will focus on exposing it to prepare for decisive action by the next administration. These goals represent all facets of the threat, and their accompaniment will prepare Washington to take effective action. Now, there's several key points that I want to talk about in there. The first of all being them condemning Putin, but saying that Putin trying to start World War III is not as big of a threat as China's economics. I mean, yes, does China have a robust economy that definitely rivals ours because they actually produce the goods? Absolutely. The fact that China manufactures everything, it gives them a lot of power, and that is true. But if you ask me if I'm more worried about China or if I'm more worried about Russia nuking Ukraine, perhaps, I am more worried about what Putin would be doing. The only reason I'm concerned about China's manufacturing capability is because of the threats that we are instigating. The other part I want to point out in there is they mentioned that we're not going to give federal grants to Chinese tech. And what strikes me as odd about that is usually a lot of grant funding for new technologies and new research, well, it's going to universities. It's not going like we're shipping it off to China to fund the research project, and that does happen sometimes. There are certain technological advances where governments will collaborate with other governments, but most grant funding is going to your nerds in a research lab somewhere at your local university that are working on something. And those people would either be citizens or would be people that were legitimate students of the university or hired by the university. So that really kind of makes me concerned that they might be looking into the background of some Chinese students that they really have no reason to be. And the third thing I want to point out here is that they feel like it's so hidden what they say the Chinese are doing that they need a comprehensive education campaign for members of Congress. And anytime I hear this, I hear, you know what? You're not going to see it the way I see it. So I need to teach you how I think. It's kind of like if you're familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, and the reason they have like the Watchtower as a guide and they have the Bible open next to it when you study in that religion is they want to teach you to interpret those passages in the Bible a certain way. So they give you their guide and they give you the Bible next to each other so that you can read what the passage says and you can read how they interpret it. They're teaching you a comprehensive education plan on how to interpret their religious beliefs. And this really kind of reminds me of the same thing. Little culty, not gonna lie. In the next part, they go a little bit into how they're going to confront the threat of communist China. And how they do this, they say, first of all, is that they're going to move strategic products back and to the U.S. in terms of manufacturing. Another big reason that they're justifying the tariffs right now. And they want to develop and pass supply chain legislation of like, okay, these products need to be made here in the event of a prolonged war with China, which was really, like I said, something I wouldn't be concerned about, except for the actions we're taking. They say here in the second paragraph that they want to go back to fossil fuels and that they do not want to have climate action in these green energy initiatives because the green energy supplies come from China. Which is kind of like cutting off your left hand to spite your right, where it's like, okay, the supplies for our green energy come from China and we want to start this trade war with China. So we don't want green energy. Let's go back to using the thing that pollutes the environment and is really going to do a lot of destruction in long term to enact our plans for power in the short. Down here in this third paragraph, this gets really, really strange. This is where it starts getting into that McCarthy era vibe again. It's seriously in every section. They call for some kind of witch hunt. But in this one, they're saying they're going to conduct a campaign to expose the entertainment industry's collusion with China, especially on the part of Hollywood studios and sports leagues, and saying that they're going to bring national attention to the fact that, like, Hollywood is involved with the Chinese government somehow. And if you look at that last sentence there, they intend to sustain enough national attention to change corporate behavior and investment. So basically, we're going to bring so much attention to this that the investors get scared and that these people no longer have endorsements or advertising deals. They also want to say they want to push back on environmental policies. No surprise there. They're justifying it by saying it favors China's business model, which of course it does if you don't give a shit about the environment. But, having clean air and water is kind of important for a lot of people here. They want to drum up some of the support against China by highlighting their human rights abuses. And that's true. The Chinese government does have multiple human rights abuses. But I doubt we're going to be having a hearing on the genocide of Native Americans in this country like Congress wants to have on the, and I might be pronouncing this wrong, Uyghur genocide. And we aren't going to see them develop a conservative coalition to address what we're doing to, support Israel bombing Palestine. If we're going to start talking about our crimes and our long history of war crimes in the United States, why don't we talk about how the atomic bomb was a war crime? There's a lot of things we could go into instead of directing this all at the Chinese. And just like we saw when they said they want to drum up support for deporting people who might not be in the country legally, they are also saying here that they want to document Chinese information warfare, intellectual property theft, cybercrime activity, and that they want to make this database of crimes against the United States to kind of be that smoking gun of like, oh, we think you guys did all this. And then they straight up going into talking about World War III involving China here, because they're saying that they want to also be able to repel them on a military front and that we need to change our defense spending to the Department of Defense to ensure that we are prepared for a war against China to protect U.S. interests. And they also say here that we're going to research our nuclear deterrence. Like, why are we even talking about throwing nukes around? Like world-ending stuff. And then in this part here, they straight up say that they're going to go after BlackRock for aiding Chinese government, which, go after BlackRock. That's fine with me. They own America. But then they get kind of weird, tying it back to diversity and inclusion and all these other things, and then saying that they want to keep the Chinese Communist Party members and their surrogates out of Congress, which is just kind of crazy. And it really reminds me of the ban on TikTok in that congressional hearing where they kept on trying to insist he was a Chinese communist member. And at the very end, they just kind of go into, we're going to help the states fight this too. I know this was a long video, but I will be back with part 6. Stay safe, everyone.